Hey everyone, welcome to AI from the Frontlines. My name is Jim Rowan and I'm the head of AI at Deloitte. Today on AI from the Frontlines, we have Dipesh Chandra, Senior Vice President and Chief Digital and Information Officer at Montefiore Health System. Dipesh, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited for us having this conversation. Can you tell the audience a little bit about your journey through various healthcare organizations and your understanding of where AI is in the industry today?
Jim, thank you. Thank you for having me here. I have spent my career working at the intersection of healthcare and technology for over 2 decades. And in the last decade, I have started getting much closer to the operations. What has kept me in this space is the impact is very real in healthcare, especially on the provider side. And if you get it right, you do improve the access, reduce burden on clinicians, and make the system work better for everyone, including our patients. AI has been a force to reckon with lately, and with it, what has changed is that it's no longer a layer of tool. It is beginning to shape how we actually work and get the work done. And in healthcare, it is becoming both of an opportunity and a responsibility. So the way it is, as I think about it, is that AI only matters if it improves the operations in a way that it's measurable, it's scalable, and foremost, it is safe. Everything else for us is noise, and I'm genuinely very excited what lies ahead of us.
So for leaders today, like what's materially different? Like what's changed from, 18 to 24 months ago? We've been talking about agents for a little while. Would love to hear your thoughts on like what's changed and how that's impacted how you're implementing AI.
I see that the biggest shift that has happened in the last 2 years is largely AI shifting from being an assistant to actually getting into an execution mode. In the last 2 years or so, I would say that the most focus um, was on co-pilots and different type of assistant technology, summarizing, drafting, helping individuals get their work done faster, which was very useful, but it was also very task level driven. The conversations we are having right now, whether uh, AI can really help run the part of the workflow, including coordinating steps, doing handoff, managing exceptions. It is getting into that execution mode. And that to me is a fundamental shift. What we are also seeing is the maturity side of AI, especially when it comes to leaders in my role at different organizations. We are seeing that the leadership team is also getting very grounded about the potential of the AI. I see there is less hype and more focus on outcome. So also from an operations perspective, that lends to that outcome is front and foremost. And lastly, I would say that the constraints that were previously around AI, which were a lot more driven by the quality of the model and the maturity of the model, this is now becoming a lot more toward whether our organization is ready for AI and what it is going to do about it in a short order. And that to me is a tectonic shift of how we were talking about AI 2 years ago to what we are talking about AI right now.
Yeah, it seems like we've really moved in the market from, a lot of pilots, a lot of experimentation. I love your kind of connection back to the LLM chatbots, right? Those are very bi-directional in terms of what you were getting from the experience to real work getting done. And so, some things I've been tracking too over the past 18 to 24 months is a bit of this like tooling change, sort of this idea of an agentic harness, kind of that allows, models to call tools and take action around that. Like, are those some of the other things that you're seeing kind of, I would guess, shift in terms of now where you can drive value in maybe use cases you couldn't go after before because some of those capabilities weren't even out of developed, invented, stabilized in the environments yet?
Yeah, I say that the models have come a very long way in the last 2 years. And in most cases, from a traditional organization or any typical organization, that is no longer a limiting factor anymore. I think it does comes down to a lot of organizational readiness. And where I sit today, the question is always whether can you actually deploy AI into a real workflow in a very, very controlled way? What kind of leadership support, change management, infrastructure readiness do you have in place to deploy AI at scale? The tooling helps, especially around the orchestration and monitoring, but it only helps when we see the organization is truly set up to use it. And in many of my conversation, I see the shift that is happening right now is not whether the model can do this or not. The question is always, can the enterprise absorb this change and can it show the benefit from it?
That makes a lot of sense. Is your, I guess one of the questions I get a lot is around sort of this operating model. And you talked about this being such a team sport with the executive teams that you work with and you see others are working with too. Um, how do you think about your op model kind of in this space? Do you feel like there's really clear, like decision rights are super helpful to have clarity around? Are certain parts of the organization leaning in more heavily than others? I think that's an important question as people are trying to navigate the right team structure, really. A team sport, yes, but like what's the right structure or governance around that? I'd love to hear your thoughts there more too.
I think the reality check on that is it is still quite evolving.
Mm.
We do not know what the target state would be, but there are some evolving transient states on the operating model that are coming. One of the most profound transient state that we are looking at it is right now is how many business functions are quickly becoming a joint partnership between the functional leader and the technology leader. So what does that mean is if we are looking at a meaningful impact of artificial intelligence with a shared service or a back office function, you do have to put the two peas in the pod, whether that is a functional leader and your CIO or your chief AI officer, they both have to work hand in hand to rewire the organization for the target state of the workload that you're targeting. So the functional leaders have previously built a lot of things around how the humans would do those tasks. But as that discussion shift in an AI assisted technology or in an AI autonomous based workflow, that workflow has to be rewritten. And it has to be rewritten in a way that the AI can run it much more efficiently, or it can be a better support to the human who are involved in that workflow. And that has now required two leaders to kind of co-lead that. And to us, that is a transient state. We don't know how this will evolve further as organizations become more and more autonomous in some of these tasks, and your digital workforce, in terms of agents, is really running at scale. What does that mean? We really do not know. But I think these transient operating model of functional leader partnering a lot more closely with their technology leader is something that I'm seeing more and more visible across different organizations.
Do you have a practical example for the audience where you feel like it's a good example of kind of how you've been able to really deploy one of these solutions? Because that's a question we get a lot too from people is, but what's really been implemented? Like what's really in production?
Yeah, so I think there are several examples, and again, I would say many of these examples are not fully autonomous as much as we would like them to be, meaning they're not entirely hands-free. At least in healthcare, we are not there yet to be fully autonomous, but we are beginning to see several examples in our revenue cycle, several examples in our pharmacy work and other areas where we are seeing that several tasks that were repetitive in nature, agents could complete those tasks, at least remove the backlog, or in a meaningful way engage with a human operator and give them a much higher productivity gain. So one good example could be around our denials management. And as we work with um, insurance companies and payers in terms of further review of our clinical documents or whatever may be a reason for a denial for a payment, some of those tasks are becoming suitable cases for agents to pull the information together, package it, create cover letters, and send it to the payers. We are seeing that they are reducing significant burden on our human operators, and those are areas definitely we see agents being quite helpful. Another similar example is around ambient listening technology, which is very, very prevalent in many health systems today. It's one of the fastest adopted AI technology today in healthcare, and its ability to listen to the conversation between a patient and a provider, and summarize the conversation in a rich medical document for a provider to then review and approve, is saving a lot of time for us. So these are early signs of how AI assisted technology is helping today. And I think we are inching gradually toward things which could be a lot more autonomous in nature in very, very near future. One of the biggest aspect where leaders can focus right now is to make sure that they are setting the foundation right, both from a policy perspective and also their system readiness perspective. You cannot put AI on top of a data technology, so you have to work on your foundation to make sure that you're working on the latest and greatest softwares and ERPs and usage of cloud technologies and such, so that it makes it a lot easier for AI to plug in. That's one element of it. The second element of it is the true identification of where the organization is going to drive its value from. Um, my recommendation has always been to start looking at where the friction is very real and very measurable within the organization.
So you've hit on two things. So the policy piece and the metrics piece, I want to get a little bit deeper on too. Like, do you have any guidelines or helpful thoughts for folks around like how you think about safe autonomy with these agents? Is there, a set rule of the road that you always want to handle, or kind of make sure that if it's engaging with a patient at this area, or a financial system integration that you want, that you feel comfortable with or less comfortable with from an autonomy perspective?
So if we ever think of technology that might be deployed in case of patient care, we have to make sure that it is safe to use, there is a human in loop. The judgment always lies in the hand of our trained clinicians, our nurses, our medical staff, and AI is never making a decision by itself about a patient care. So just to understand the downside risk is really important.
That was the policy side I wanted to hit on. You also spoke about the metrics, and that's another question that's top of mind for a lot of the C-suite boards as well. That's, how do I measure the value of AI? I've made these investments. What's the right metric to use? Is it financial? Are there others? So I'd love to hear some more from you about what you're thinking in that space and what's been successful for you.
Yeah, this has been a, a strong area of debate for us internally in the organization. How do you measure the ROI impact? And they, at a very high level, they they lie in two key buckets for us. One is an AI tool is helping improve the productivity, the outcome, the experience, aspects of our operations, of our clinical care delivery. And there will be a way to measure those. The metrics around there will be very different. The second bucket is a lot more focused on a direct financial gain, whether it is coming in from um, cost reduction, whether it is coming in from aspects of revenue generation, whether it is coming in from deployment of technology that allows to move certain inefficiency in our system away, whatever that may be. It's those bucket of use cases have a direct line to the dollar value. And it's not that one is better than the other. Teams get some of their time restored so they can focus more on the patient care versus doing administrative tasks. Um, did the cost or the delays that happens in a given workflow, did they come down? So some of those metrics are really, really important for us from a real business value. And we also recognize that one bucket it's harder to calculate the dollar value from each one of them, but what we are trying to measure in them is equally important for us. It is important for us to drive efficiency. It is important for us to drive the experience. It is important for us to drive safety forward. And so this is an ongoing debate always. How do we look at the ROI of these AI companies and the tools? And what are we trying to measure? What is the lift that is going to provide? And some will have a dollar value to it and others won't.
So it seems, the flexibility on the policy side, what I'm hearing from you too on the metric side is a little bit of flexibility as well, right? That there's this space requires a lot of dynamic agility, flexibility, thought processes that we're going to change versus you lock in for 10 years and we'll just watch this thing and monitor some metrics against it. Is that a fair, high level takeaway?
It is. I think the top line there is AI still has an ROI problem today.
Mm,
And I think as stewards in the industry who are pushing AI further in the organization, this is a real challenge that we are working with as well, that how do we prove the ROI on them? And as I said, in some cases, the dollar values are very real, and in others, they are not so much. So the usage of AI does increase the cost of our technical operation. And so we have to create a vis-a-vis map to the ROI. And the organization has to accept whether that ROI needs to be on the dollar side or it needs to be on the other outcome side that are non-dollar based.
totally. Well, let's shift into a little bit of like you get thinking about the operations in a health system and in an organization and how this works. And so one of the questions I think on a lot of people's minds is like when does like these tech platforms themselves start like running operations? Like in the in the context of a health system, can they actually like all these pieces can be integrated together to really run the system? Um, is that possible? Are you seeing that like on the horizon as you think about how you run your organization?
Uh, I think the technology has been running operations for well over 20 years at this
Mm,
point with the deployment of ERP solutions when things moved from paper to digital and SaaS-based solution. But we tend to label them as more tech-enabled solutions. So
mm.
in very near future, I don't think so that is going to change too much. I think, Jim, what you're referring toward is a totally autonomous workflow that
Right.
doesn't require a human. And I think we are quite a few steps away from that being a reality, at least in healthcare for sure. And I see that other large industries are many steps away from that as well. It the 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 automation doesn't really mean that it is going to replace the concept of enterprise. I think it will mean much more around the workflow coordination that happens in any business operation. It is the routing, it is the monitoring, it is the decision support. They will increasingly start getting handled by the software, but the accountability, the judgment, especially in the healthcare space, the clinical judgment, the overall strategy as to how the work needs to get done and the business value gets delivered will continue to sit with the organization, with the human workforce. And I think this is the augmentation part of it at the process level versus a true replacement of the workforce. And I think we are going to see that at least for the next decade. How does that shift happen? But a fully autonomous enterprise is probably still a sci-fi for us.
I mean, if you used the analogy earlier on too with autonomous vehicles, you first introduced, right, and with a lot of fanfare, but we're still at a very early stage of scaling. And nothing against any of the work that's been done, but it's taken a while, right, to navigate the risk environment, multiple different edge cases of how you test these solutions in the real world behaves differently than what you think in a lab and all that stuff. So I think your horizon view makes a lot of sense because it just takes a while for the absorption of this technology into our business processes and into our psyche and into how we want to work. What maybe building on that a little bit, one of the things we see from the tech providers too is a lot of kind of focus on platforms, and like these tech platforms will run your operations. As a CIO looking across your tech estate, how do you think about kind of all these different kind of positions of platforms? What is a platform? Do I build agents in one area versus another? How do I connect them? That seems like a very complex set of decisions and choices that you're having to navigate with maybe not a clear sight of like what the future might hold, 2 to 3 years from now, um, in this space. How are you navigating that and thinking about it?
I think the very concept of platform is changing significantly all around us. I think there have been a lot of discussion and debate whether SaaS softwares are going to be relevant for us in future or not, if agents can do
Mhm.
all the tasks. So the whole concept around platform, I think, is evolving. But the way I look at it is anything that is a repeatable workforce becomes quote unquote platformable. Things like in healthcare, scheduling mechanics, routing, basic administrative work. I think things that are repetitive in nature, they tend to or will become more platformable. And we see today that many of our ERP vendors that work with us are quickly beginning to make those human tasks become part of the platform itself. You press a button, things happen, it routes and does its things by itself. I think what continue to remain bespoke will be anything that is tied to judgment and decision making, things around strategy, things around that are going to be more edge cases in a given workflow. Um, Anything complex decision that we have to take, and more so where the risk and reward ratio shifts dramatically differently. I think those will still remain a lot more bespoke, and the platform would just be very shy in making those decisions. I think even as an organization we would be not willing to allow the platform to make an autonomous decision in some of those scenarios.
Mhm.
So this is where we see that the standardization wherever you can will continue to move toward platform, but we continue to keep the control very defined who we are as an organization, what is our primary service, and what do we stand for will continue to remain part of our operating model.
Do you worry on the platform side around lock-in? You've been around these digital transformations for a while and seen these stories play out. Is that a concern for you as you think about some of your investments in AI?
Lock-in is definitely something that as technologists we worry about a lot. We are making a lot of conscious choices on what needs to be short-term bet versus long-term bets on things. Um, Given the space is evolving so fast, given the amount of capital dollars that are flowing in the investment in these companies, there are going to be massive reckoning that would happen in this space. We are seeing already that companies and tools that existed 1 year ago are now by default a byproduct within a large foundation model companies even today.
Mhm.
And the the larger platform and the established AI companies are quickly going to keep adding more features. The speed at which they will add feature is enormously fast. And so we are going to see several companies emerging from this advancement, but very quickly dwindling down because what they did is now part of a larger platform company. So from our perspective, who buy these technologies and use them in our workplace, we are trying to avoid scenarios where we see that there will be an opportunity within a year or less than 2 years that this may be swallowed up by a large platform company which is evolving faster. And so we are trying to avoid any kind of a long-term partnership in this area and let the market show us where we need to start placing bets.
So I think we've covered a lot of the major topics here today, sort of where you're investing from a use case perspective, how you're rewiring the organization from an AI capability, We've talked, a little bit around sort of the cost, the FinOps around this, our token maxing stories. I think the underlying theme in here as well has been around sort of like trust and governance, responsible autonomy, as we've hit on through a couple of these conversations too.
I think we touched quite a bit around overall governance. We touched quite a bit around compliance and the legal framework and understanding that downside risk of these technologies. One of the things that still worries me and something we talk about in different forums is silent errors,
Mm.
especially the things that are not an obvious failures. These are small compounding mistakes done in a workflow that looks fine on the surface level, but the process drifts from one side to another side. You can think about in the analogy of we talk about hallucination problem in models quite a bit, and there has been a lot more work done to bring it down. But hallucination as a concept, if you begin to amplify and you are in a conversation and you don't notice hallucination, your conversation goes in a completely different direction. And that is the type of silent error that when you start building on small, not obvious mistakes and it begins to compound, you have drifted far in a different reality where you need it to be. And that is the part to be concerned about and be watchful about. These are extremely hard to detect and they get very dangerous over a period of time. And that is why the governance, the human oversight, the critical thinking is really, really important. And it is a core part of our overall AI strategy as well, is how do we make sure that we have the critical thinking still among us to see when this drift begins to happen and we push a brake on it.
I love it. All right, so maybe just wrapping up, Dipesh, I'd love to hear from you. Future of AI. What excites you the most about this space and sort of the possibilities that are around the corner here?
I remain extremely positive about it. I think this is a force to reckon with. This will fundamentally change the way we work, the way we get work done, the way we live our life. I think this is something not to be ignored. I do think that the routine coordinations, the triage, the workflow management, they all will, over a period of time, will start getting automated. People will, or our human workforce will begin to focus more and more on exceptions and making key decisions when it matters. Um, and the higher form of thinking will get still remain human centric, but the I would say repetitive task and routine work will begin to take more autonomous approach. The difference I see that the organizations who won't adopt the AI, it will be those who do not know how to integrate this into their operation. It will be those who struggle in changing their workforce, who are not taking a strategic lens of where their organization needs to be in 5 years using this technology. And I see that as a real gap across the board. But also, a lot of inspiring stories are coming out from several organizations in banking, in retail, in manufacturing, in healthcare, where people are structurally thinking different. And there will be great stories that we will see coming out in 2 to 3 years where organizations are going to start making meaningful pivot in this area to come with as a more AI enabled organization. And I remain incredibly excited about it. And I always look for those stories to uh, learn myself.
That's great. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us. I'm sure our followers are going to really appreciate your insights. We'll have to get you back on here because this thing changes every 3 to 6 months. So we'll see what new lessons we've learned in the next quarter. Take care. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for having me.